Hello everyone, my name is Hugo Prévost. Welcome to another episode of SVGA, your PC retro gaming podcast. Today for episode number 23, we have a special guest, Chase from YesBox Studios. We'll get there. Hello, Chase.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being on the show. We are here to talk about Metropolis 1998, your upcoming city management game. I've discovered this. I think, on Reddit, and I think you made a post about your game, or someone made a post about your game, and I was quite intrigued by it. And there's obviously a retro gaming aspect to it. We'll get to that a bit later in the interview, and obviously that's why we're talking about it today on the show. Let's get right into it. What made you decide to create something looks a bit like a mix of SimCity 2000 and a bit of The Sims?
Sure. So I grew up in the 90s as a kid, and I got my first family computer, I think when I was around 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I didn't ask for any games, but my neighbors had games, so I would go to their house and watch them play Roller Coaster Tycoon, watch them play SimCity 2000, and eventually I asked my parents to get me those games because they were so fun to watch. And I had really fond memories of just playing those games. And honestly, I just want to recreate the feeling I had as a kid for people today. Mm-hmm. Playing those games where you can mix creativity, like designing stuff visually, and also stepping back and like watching the simulation come to life.
If you go online, if you look at images from the game, it's it's a 2D isometric view, it's pixel graphics. You've just talked about reliving some of that nostalgia for old games. Was there a point still where there was in your mind an argument between going with modern 3D graphics, or it was already set that you wanted absolutely to have some retro 2D stuff?
I was determined to make a 2D game. Reason being, one, as a solo developer, I don't think I could have handled making a city builder as a 3D game. Mm-hmm. City Skylines has already covered that market as well. Yeah. And the first game they did amazing. I haven't played CS2 yet. I've seen the reviews, but
it's not. The launch date was not that good. I've heard it's better now, but I've played it a few hours, then I published my review, and that was it. Never went back to it for now.
I plan on picking it up once the reviews improve.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to compete with them, and it's a lot of work to do 3D from what I've heard. This is actually my first game. But one thing I love about 2D, or at least particularly isometric, with pixel art, is that I think, my personal opinion, I think pixel art gives you just enough detail to see what's going on, and not enough where your imagination has to fill in the gaps and whatnot. I think that's why Minecraft was so popular. It's like just enough detail, and then your imagination can run wild with it. And I thought Roller Coaster Tycoon, SimCity 2000, I thought those games looked great. Like as a kid, and even today, go back and play Roller Coaster Tycoon, and I think it looks amazing. Like, mm-hmm. Just like it's timeless. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I understand that. When you, obviously, like you said, you're one man army in that case. When it comes to creating this kind of game, because obviously creating any game is difficult, but when it comes to creating not only a game where, for example, you go from point A to point B, now you have a game where there's a simulation engine inside the game. I think you on your website it talks about up to 100,000 people at the same time inside of a city with cars and trains and buses and so on. So how hard is it to create this kind of game?
It's the hardest thing is being patient.
Yeah.
Um, it just takes time to develop the software to be able to handle that that amount of agents. I probably spent, let's see, I've been working on it for 2.5 years. I probably spent 6 months of that, maybe more,
Hmm.
just working on the pathfinding and the road placement code and getting that to be as efficient and as fast as physically possible,
Yeah.
because that is the traditional bottleneck in these types of games. Like if you play Dwarf Fortress, after 100 units, 120 units, even 200 units, the CPU just starts screeching to a halt. I know City Skylines did a pretty good job. I think I can get up to 80K before the game starts slowing down.
Hmm.
Um, but it's I don't know. Things aren't hard. They take time, and being patient and working through all the little things you need to do to get to that point where you can run 100K units or whatever.
Yeah.
It just takes a lot of time.
So there's no starting kit, for example, because even if you talk about someone today, talk about city building games, probably they talk about SimCity or City Skylines, or there's a bunch of other titles less well known, but still there is a genre of games, but it's not. From top of my mind, there's no RPG maker for city building games, so you have to build everything from scratch, basically.
Sure. Sorry, what's the question there?
I was no,
Sorry.
because I was what I was saying is that there's no you have to start from the bottom. There's not a kit that you can pick up, a program that you can buy on the store that
Hmm.
is going to help you with assets. Well, there's be visual assets, of course, possibly, but there's nothing. There's no CD as there is RPG makers, for example. There's no CD management makers.
Hmm. Um, I don't. Typically, city builders are difficult to make according to what people say,
Hmm.
and I'd say it's difficult. It's definitely true. Um, but what do I want to say? You just got me thinking. Like as a side note, there's engines you can use like Unreal and
Yeah.
Unity, and I chose not to go down that path because for me personally, if I have to use someone else's code and it's organized in the way that they think, that for me is going to create a lot of friction. And I think I would have never gotten as far as I have. I probably would have quit by now, to be honest, if I didn't develop my own engine to basically it's organized how I think. And so
Yeah.
when I go to work in it or edit it or add to it, it's almost like I have photographic memory because it's designed exactly how I think and organize data. Um, and for me, there's a very high upfront cost to do that.
Yeah.
But now, a year, 2 year later, it's really easy for me to debug stuff, to add new features, remove features, whatever. I don't spend a lot of time debugging, which is a typical truth in most software engineering or development.
And in your game, in Metropolis 1998, there's two things that I find quite interesting. The first one is that you can create your own buildings, technically. So you can customize, put the furniture down. This is something we never had, obviously, in SimCity 2000, for example, or other titles, the same kind of games. But the most interesting thing for me is that this this way of thinking by zones, because basically usually what you put down is not buildings unless it's a special building. You create some zones where there can be a type of development, commercial, industrial, residential, etc. And you've decided to not use that kind of way of thinking. So what was the reasoning behind that choice?
Sure. There's two. I hear two different questions, so let me give you two different answers.
Yeah, sure.
Regarding the place designing stuff, that was all inspired by Roller Coaster Tycoon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in RCT, you place literally every single asset in that game, and it becomes your park. Like you designed it, you put everything. You know, it's 100% your own creation. There are pre-made roller coasters. I personally never use those. I like designing them myself, and I love that aspect of the game. And I thought it'd be really cool to bring that to the city builder genre. And my memory just, what was the second question?
The thing about getting rid of the zones, so there's no
Yes.
commercial, residential, industrial zones.
Well, there is RICO, residential, industry, commercial office zones, but they're not implemented the same way that like City Skylines and SimCity does it.
Yeah.
Like when you place a zone in those games, it automatically chooses what building that grows in that zone. And that personally, that bugged me a lot when I played City Skylines, because you get like 4 fish factories, like all on the same block.
Yeah.
They probably put like 5, I don't even know, like 5 or 10 base businesses in that game. And that always bugged me, and it took away from the kind of like broke the fourth wall, because, you know, a city is made up of tons of different businesses that people rely on. And so I wanted to change focus so that the player, one of the goals or the game loops of the game is the player is fulfilling specific demands, which are specific businesses. So they can specifically place a cafe, a grocery store, whatever, wherever they want. I did make a recent change where residential zones can be placed and grow just like City Skylines and SimCity, because I found, and so did the people who have played my game so far, it's very repetitive to place dozens or hundreds of individual residential buildings. And there's less variety in that than there is in placing specific businesses. So I recently added a function that will auto grow. It acts exactly like City Skylines. You place a big residential zone, it gets broken up into smaller plots, and then it will, you know, based on demand, it will grow, you know, the buildings in those zones as needed.
Yeah, because, well, there is a demo that is available right now, which is in, I guess, pre-alpha state. Is that right?
Pre-alpha,
yeah.
Yes.
And so we understand that it's obviously not complete, but yeah, I was surprised by this. I was to see that I could just pick up 8 floors apartment or 8 apartment building and just plop it down. This reminded me, I never played Roller Coaster Tycoon, but this reminded me
out.
I should, but yeah, it's on our list, our very long list of games to play for the podcast. We'll get to it one day. But what it reminded me of was SimTown, which is,
I've never played that, actually.
It's a weird one. It's a weird one from Maxis, but yeah, it was in a sense where there were no zones, and so you just plop down different types of houses to get the population you needed to reach your next objective. But yes, it reminded me of SimTown, that weird little game from Maxis. But yeah, so it was the idea of being able, one, to be able to design our own buildings, and to get rid, well, in part, of these kind of auto growing zones. It's an interesting way to not to say deviate, because it's a bit there's a bad sense to that word, but to change from the main way of thinking when it comes to designing these kind of games.
I think you have to deviate every new game. If you're making the same thing, you know, you're competing with something that has already been a success on the market. Why play that when, you know, the same exact game with an existing community is already out there?
Well, that was my next question. Obviously, well, you are one man developing a game from mostly scratch. It's still a genre where there are some well-known names. Well, we won't talk about the latest SimCity game, but still, people still play SimCity 2000, 3000, SimCity 4, obviously City Skylines. There's a bunch of other ones that we said. So I'm guessing that's how you'll differentiate yourself from the rest, basically.
There was a handful of things I chose to differentiate myself. Obviously, designing your own buildings is one. Seeing inside the buildings is another one. I did a bunch of market research before I even wrote my first line of code. And surprisingly, there's depending how far back you want to look, semi-recently, there's probably like 3 or 4 traditional CD builders on the market.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you choose any other genre, literally anything, and there's going to be dozens of competition. What's happened now is there are people making city builder-like games, but they add on survival or strategy components to it. So it becomes like Banish inspired a whole new wave of city building games, like literally hundreds of games inspired by that game. And don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure Banish was the first major, or at least for the first source of survival city builder mix. Could be wrong. But yeah, I saw there was a few, not very little competition in the traditional market. The graphics or the aesthetics, no one has done that since the end of 2002 or 3, whenever Roller Coaster Tycoon was released.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind because I think it's beautiful and people are still playing those games today. Like you can go on SteamDB, you can see there's, I don't even know the number, somewhere between 500 to 1,000, maybe 2,000 concurrent users still playing those games today.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, similar isometric pixel graphics, 1,000, 2,000 people playing the game right now. And so I saw there's still a market, there's still demand or need for this. And I personally just loved that aesthetic, and it was just, I didn't want to go 3D, so it was the perfect direction to go in.
Is there a desire on your part to provide some sort of a more laid-back experience? Because that's the way I play a city managing game, but eventually you'll get to a point where it's all macro. It's all zones and zones of influence, for example, fire station and so on. And I was thinking, well, if I can design my own buildings and put down a sofa there and a lamp over there on one floor of one building, I'm not going to zoom out the game and just play on 5 speed and just wait for the money to come in or for the next disaster to strike. So was there a willingness, well, not necessarily a willingness, was there a desire on your part to say, okay, you have to spend, you cannot obviously chose not to, but if you want to, you can spend an hour designing your own building and, like you said, be able to see inside of it. So you're not going to play it fully zoomed out or fully macro. You have to get your hands dirty, so to speak.
I wanted to give the player the option, going back to Roller Coaster Tycoon, which you haven't played yet. You got to play it. As a kid, I loved just even placing flowers next to the sidewalk and just building something pretty. I want to give that opportunity to the people that play my game. But I'm also targeting the traditional city builder market. There's going to be strategy, there's going to be an economy, which is, economy is much closer to 1.0 because that's that's wrapping all the simulation into a dollar figure, basically. So that's going to come last. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yes. Well, speaking of version 1.0, for now you have, I'm guessing the demo is not does not have the features that are available right now to you, obviously. But what are the next step for development? Because I'm guessing 1.0 is not necessarily around the corner. So what are the next steps for you for your game?
Sure. First step is getting to EA, so early access.
Mm-hmm.
Not the company. And for me to get there, I want the RICO, the residential, commercial, all that stuff, demand loop.
Yeah.
And I'm working on that right now. That's the major component I think that's left. There's going to be more transportation options, subway,
Mm-hmm.
buses, taxis, whatever. That's going to be probably going to be post early access. My goal is, if the game does well, I need to hire a 3D modeler to make sprites for anything that moves in the game.
Yeah.
Because everything's pixel art, you're outputting as you can't see my hands. You're outputting a single sprite for everything that you see on the screen. So when a vehicle turns, you need a sprite for every single angle of that vehicle, for every going down a road, going up a hill, whatever. So right now I'm solo developer, but I work with 2 contractors for the pixel art.
Mm-hmm.
One does the isometric and one does the top-down art. And it's just too much, not enough time to have them create, 100 vehicles, like for one vehicle, create 100 sprites for all the different angles. That's definitely a 3D modeler job. So adding terrain height, that's going to be part of the, early access, the 3D modeler. So there's demand. I'm still figuring out if I should implement a very basic economy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it doesn't make sense at that stage, but that's what players expect.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it could make something work. There's going to be, I want more businesses, more general AI for like crime, for fire, for like hospital emergency stuff. Electricity, power plants, water pumps. I may just start with that being imported, because that's actually how towns start anyway. Like, it never made sense to, hey, we're going to build a coal power plant. Maybe it did back in the day, but like, as far as I know now, or at least in the 90s, like, you built a town and the power and the water, or at least the power was already provided by that point.
Well, it's basically how they do it in City Skylines too. You obviously start by buying power and water from outside, and then eventually you build your own grid. So yeah, that makes sense.
I do want to go down the more realistic path. Unless people hate it, I will pivot. But
yeah,
that's the goal. I think that covers like the major things I want to get for early access.
And for now, on Steam at least, it's listed as the end of the year, the end of this year. Do you think that it's possible to keep that release date, or it's maybe pushed back in 2025, maybe, for example?
It's possible. I don't have a clear answer until this fall, I would guess. Yeah, it's part of my development process is taking in feedback from players, and implementing things that what seem like a lot of people want, and focusing on that. Because I don't know, part of making a game for me is not just putting my idea out there and saying this is what it is and you have to play it like this. Like, I want the game to be fun, and incorporating people's feedback and what they like and what they don't like. Like, people were complaining about placing individual residential houses. Like, yeah, you know what? It makes a lot of sense. I should just make that an auto-grow zone thing, because it's just a repetitive headache.
Yeah. So you'll wait. You'll see, like you said, depending on players' feedback, when it's ready to come out, and when it's ready to at least launch in early access, like you said, and eventually get to that fabled 1.0 version.
There's going to be 1.0 and then probably post 1.0.
Yeah, exactly.
These types of games you can literally work on forever. Like people were creating mods for City Skylines even up to today. So.
Yeah. Well, people are still creating WADs files for Doom, so it's 30 years past.
Yeah.
So, yeah. If the game is good enough, the people will still create content for it, even decades later. Are you encouraged by the feedback so far? Do you feel that the community is behind you?
Yeah. I have a small Discord server now, which is great. But whenever I post on Reddit or Twitter, pretty much my only places I post right now, I tend to get a lot of positive feedback, excitement. A lot of people closer to my age are like, "Oh, this is awesome nostalgia," and younger people are like, "Oh, this is so cute and pretty." So like, I'm pleasing both audiences there, which is great. So yeah, so far it's been encouraging, but it's also a requirement to keep moving forward with this. 2.5 years in, you can't be doing this if no one is excited about it by this point.
I mean, you can, but it ends up getting
it's an exercise in masochism.
Yeah, you have to have some kind of support, otherwise you're just gonna hit the wall at one point. Chase from YesBox Studios, thank you very much for being here today with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we can obviously check out your game, Metropolis 1998. It's, as you said, on Discord. There's a subreddit about it. Of course, it's on Steam too, so we'll have a look. And fingers crossed for at least an early access version before the end of the year. We'll see how it goes. So thanks again. And to the people at home, listening home, of course, thank you very much for your time. You can catch up on past episodes on pieuvre.ca. We're also on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Until next time,